"Help me for the love of God!" The desperate cry shattered the dawn silence, causing birds to scatter from ancient oaks. Thomlin froze, his calloused hands still gripping the worn handle of his axe. 32 winters had taught the miller to mind his own affairs, especially matters concerning armor and blood. But the voice called again, weaker this time, and something in Thomlin's chest tightened. He found the knight in a small clearing, slumped against a lichen-covered boulder. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating a scene most villagers would flee from. A broken man in a shattered golden lion armor, blood seeping through the cracks of metal plate. "Are you alive?" Thomlin whispered, kneeling beside the fallen warrior. The knight's eye opened with difficulty, glazed with pain. "Don't leave me here, peasant. My name is Sir Aldric of Halverick." Without hesitation, Thomlin lifted the armored man onto his shoulders. His back already carried the pain of a lifetime working at the village mill. But under the knight's weight, there was something different, an urgency that burned stronger than any pain. "I won't leave you, Sir Knight," he muttered, feeling warm blood soak through his threadbare tunic. The journey back to his hut was arduous. Twice Thomlin nearly collapsed, his legs trembling beneath the combined weight of the knight and his armor. When they finally reached his humble dwelling, a simple structure of clay and timber, Thomlin laid Sir Aldric on his own straw mattress. Inside the hut, dried herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with the bittersweet scent of elderberry infusion. Thomlin worked methodically, removing the knight's armor piece by piece, washing wounds with rainwater collected in a clay basin, stitching cuts with flax thread, and applying an ancient plantain salve learned from his grandmother, a healer before the war. "Why do you help me?" Sir Aldric asked, his voice hoarse when he briefly regained consciousness. "Your kind usually fears knights." Thomlin continued working without looking up. "Because a wounded man is a man, not a title." Through the night, the knight's fever raged. Thomlin stayed awake, changing poultices and offering sips of water from a wooden cup. By morning light, Sir Aldric's breathing had steadied, though he remained in deep slumber. As the first rays of dawn painted Eldharrow's fields gold, Thomlin stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The air carried the scent of moss and damp earth, a familiar comfort to a man who had known only simple life. Upon his return, Thomlin stopped in his tracks. A procession of knights and nobles, dressed in velvet cloaks and gleaming crests, lined the path to his mud hut as if they stood in the antechamber of a throne. The oldest among them, a broad-shouldered man with a silver-flecked beard, dismounted from a midnight black steed, and, to Thomlin's astonishment, bowed his head. "You saved my son," the nobleman declared, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Sir Aldric is the direct heir to Halverick and bearer of the lion sword." He then withdrew a sealed parchment and said, "By decree of the king in the honor of House Halverick, you have the right to name your desire." The other nobles stared at him with undisguised amazement. Thomlin's hands, still stained with dried blood and healing herbs, trembled slightly. "I wish only to finish milling my wheat, nothing more." Muffled laughter from some courtiers was cut short by the sound of Sir Aldric, who emerged from the hut with his arm bandaged. "Silence!" His voice echoed like steel striking stone. "If not for this man, I would be rotting in the forest. He has more honor than all of us combined." Lord Halverick's eyes widened at the sight of his son standing, then narrowed as he studied Thomlin more carefully. The miller stood barefoot on the dirt path, his simple tunic stained with the blood of nobility, yet he met the lord's gaze without flinching. "Father," Sir Aldric continued, "this man tended my wounds with knowledge that surpasses our castle physician. He used herbs and methods I've never seen." A murmur passed through the gathering of nobles. Thomlin felt their scrutiny like a physical weight pressing against his chest. He had lived his entire life invisible to these people. Now suddenly he stood in their full attention. "Thomlin of Eldharrow," Lord Halverick pronounced formally, "the house of Halverick stands in your debt. Tonight you shall be our honored guest at the castle." The miller's heart sank. He looked back at his humble hut, at the mill wheel visible in the distance, at the life he understood. "My lord, this is not a request," Lord Halverick said, though his tone remained respectful. "It is a matter of honor." And so it was that Thomlin the miller, son of no one of consequence, found himself walking among the nobility of Eldharrow, a simple man swept into the currents of a world far beyond his understanding, a world of power, privilege, and deadly games. Thomlin had never known that stone could shine, yet here in Halverick Castle, polished marble floors reflected torchlight like water at sunset. Tapestries of scarlet and gold adorned walls thicker than the oldest oaks, depicting battles and hunts of ancestral glory. The contrast was almost offensive. Tapestries woven with golden thread, silver chalices overflowing with cherry wine, and perfumes that masked the pure air he knew. The eyes of the court pierced him, not for who he was, but for what he dared to be there. A peasant among crests and banners. A servant had forced him into new clothes, a tunic of azure linen, soft boots of calfskin, and a belt with a small silver buckle. His weathered hands, still bearing traces of Sir Aldric's blood beneath the fingernails, looked wrong against such finery. "The honored guest approaches," announced a herald, causing 100 faces to turn toward Thomlin as he entered the great hall. Conversations hushed. Nobles who had been laughing moments before now stared with expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly concealed disdain. Thomlin felt every step echo against the stone, announcing his presence, his intrusion, into their world. Lord Halverick rose from the high table, raising a jeweled goblet. "Tonight we honor a man of Eldharrow, who through his simple wisdom and steady hands preserved the life of my son and heir." The nobles raised their cups in obligatory toast, though many lips barely touched their wine. "Come," said Lord Halverick, gesturing to an empty seat near the high table, not at it, but adjacent, in a position that marked him as neither servant nor peer. The feast that followed was beyond anything Thomlin had ever experienced. 23 different dishes appeared before him: roasted pheasant stuffed with apples and sage, salmon poached in almond milk, venison in blackberry sauce, pastries shaped like lions and towers. His wooden spoon, the one he'd carried in his belt for years, looked childish beside the silver utensils provided. "Try the peacock," suggested a young noblewoman seated nearby, her voice surprisingly kind. "They've preserved the feathers in the presentation, but the meat is quite delicious." "Thank you, my lady," Thomlin replied, using the formal address he'd heard others employ. "In truth, I've never seen such a bird alive, let alone prepared for eating." She smiled, seemingly amused by his honesty. "I am Lady Elaine of Westmarch, and you are the miller who saved Sir Aldric with woodland medicine." Before Thomlin could respond, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. "Lady Elaine, surely your father would disapprove of you consorting with the help." Lord Halverick, the king's brother-in-law, stood over them, his thin lips curled in contempt. His doublet of crimson velvet was embroidered with golden thread, and rings adorned each finger. "Lord Halverick," she acknowledged with a stiff nod. "I was merely ensuring our guest feels welcome, as courtesy demands." Halverick ignored her explanation, focusing his cold gaze on Thomlin. "Tell us, miller, what do you know of war beyond the sound of your mill? What kind of man are you, who can barely hold a sword?" The hall quieted. Even the minstrels paused their playing. Thomlin felt dozens of eyes upon him, waiting for him to embarrass himself. "I am the kind of man who cleans wounds with his own hands," Thomlin replied, his voice steady. "That is more than many here have done." The hall fell silent. Lord Halverick's laughter broke the tension, booming across the stone chamber. "Well answered, miller. Perhaps there is wisdom in simplicity after all." Halverick's face darkened. He leaned closer to Thomlin, speaking so only those nearby could hear. "You forget yourself, peasant. Tomorrow you will return to your mud and wheat, and this temporary elevation will end. Remember your place." As the feast continued, Thomlin noticed the noble's true nature emerging as wine flowed more freely. Some spoke of peasants as if they were livestock, discussing crop failures not for the hunger they caused but for the inconvenience to their hunting grounds. Others wagered excessive sums on trivial matters, one lord betting a year's worth of a village's grain production on which of two identical white hounds would reach a throne bone first. "Do not judge them too harshly," Sir Aldric said, appearing at Thomlin's side. His arm remained bandaged, but color had returned to his face. "Few have known true hardship." "I do not judge, Sir Knight," Thomlin replied. "I merely observe." "And what do you observe?" Thomlin considered carefully before answering. "That high walls do not always protect against the most dangerous enemies." Sir Aldric raised an eyebrow. "And what enemies might those be?" "Pride, complacency, the belief that birth alone determines worth." The knight studied Thomlin's face, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps my father was right to invite you here. Come, there is something I wish to show you." Sir Aldric led Thomlin away from the feast, down torchlit corridors and up a spiraling staircase. They emerged onto a stone balcony overlooking the castle bailey. Beyond the walls, Thomlin could see the darkened countryside, pinpricks of light marking villages and farmsteads. His own mill was too distant to discern, but he knew its exact location by heart. "My grandfather built this castle with stone quarried from 3 different mountains," Sir Aldric said. "He believed diverse foundations created stronger walls." "A wise belief," Thomlin replied. "Yet look there." The knight pointed to a section of wall where torchlight revealed a thin crack, running from foundation to battlement. Single source stone, added during my father's expansion, already failing. Thomlin understood the unspoken message. Even castles have weaknesses when built on homogeneous foundations. Indeed. Sir Aldric turned to face him directly. Thomlin, Their conversation was interrupted by the pounding of boots on stone. A guard appeared, breathing heavily. My lord, scouts report mercenary forces advancing through the hills. They fly no banner, but their numbers are significant. Sir Aldric's expression hardened. How many? At least 200, sir. They'll reach our outer farms by dawn. Alert my father. Muster the garrison. As the guard hurried away, Sir Aldric turned to Thomlin. It seems our evening of philosophical discussion must end. Who would attack Halverick? Thomlin asked. Many would benefit from our fall. We control the river passage to the eastern kingdoms. Sir Aldric's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. You should return to your quarters. You'll be safe within these walls. But Thomlin remembered something, a pattern observed during his years of walking the hills around his mill. Sir Knight, these mercenaries, are they taking the North Ridge path? Yes. Why? There may be something I can tell your commanders about that route. Sir Aldric hesitated only briefly before nodding. Come then, let us see if a miller's knowledge can serve Halverick once more. The war chamber of Halverick Castle buzzed with urgent voices. Knights in partial armor leaned over an enormous oak table where a crudely drawn map displayed the surrounding lands. Lord Halverick stood at the head, his silver-flecked beard catching the light of iron candelabras as he conferred with his master-at-arms. When Thomlin entered behind Sir Aldric, conversation faltered. Expressions of confusion, followed quickly by dismissal, crossed the faces of the assembled commanders. What is the meaning of this? Demanded Lord Varick, now wearing a leather jerkin over his fine clothes. This is no place for a miller. He knows the terrain. Sir Aldric replied simply. Lord Halverick studied his son. Then Thomlin. Speak then, miller. Quickly. Thomlin approached the table hesitantly, eyes scanning the map. It was impressively detailed for Nobility's work, but still missed crucial features of the land he had walked since childhood. May I? He asked, gesturing to a pot of charcoal nearby. After a nod from Lord Halverick, Thomlin took a piece and leaned over the map. The commanders shifted uncomfortably as his rough hands moved across their careful work. The mercenaries will come through this valley, Thomlin explained, adding a thin line to the map. But there is a dry creek bed here that doesn't appear on your drawing. His charcoal traced a winding path. It cuts beneath the ridge. During spring floods, it carves deeper each year. And why should this matter to us? Asked Lord Varick with undisguised contempt. Because, Thomlin continued undeterred, if we dig trenches here and here, linking to the natural depression, then cover them with brush. His hand moved quickly, marking several crosses. The first line of mounted soldiers will fall. Their formation will break. Silence fell over the room as the knight studied his markings. This might work, admitted the master-at-arms reluctantly, if what he says about the terrain is true. Every summer since I was a boy, I've gathered elderberries along that creek, Thomlin said. I know every stone and turn. Lord Halverick straightened. Decision made. Prepare 30 men with shovels and picks. Sir Aldric, take command of the ambush force. He turned to Thomlin. You will guide them to this location. My lord, interrupted Lord Varick, surely you don't intend to base our defense on a peasant's word? These mercenaries are professional soldiers. We should meet them with our full cavalry on open ground, as honor demands. Honor will not save my people if we are outnumbered, Lord Halverick replied firmly. We fight with the advantages we have. As they dispersed to prepare, Thomlin found himself alone with Sir Aldric once more. You've never seen battle, have you, Thomlin? The knight asked quietly. No, sir. Only its aftermath. The refugees who fled through our village during the eastern campaigns. Sir Aldric nodded grimly. War is not like the stories. It's mud and blood and fear. He hesitated. You need not join us. Having shown us the location, I'll go, Thomlin interrupted. Your men won't find the right spot without me, especially in darkness. The knight studied him carefully before offering a simple nod of respect. Within the hour, they rode out, 30 men with digging tools, followed by 60 mounted knights. Thomlin sat uncomfortably on a borrowed mare. The first time he'd ever ridden a horse. The animal sensed his nervousness, tossing her head and sidestepping until Sir Aldric reached over to steady the reins. Sit deeper in the saddle, he advised. Move with her, not against her. They traveled under moonlight, keeping to forest paths to avoid detection. Twice they dismounted to lead the horses through particularly dense woodland. Thomlin's legs ached, unaccustomed to riding, but he kept pace without complaint. Near midnight, they reached the designated spot. Thomlin directed the men to dig, connecting the natural depression of the creek bed to create a concealed trench. Knights positioned themselves in the surrounding woods, while archers found perches in ancient oaks. As dawn approached, They waited in silence. Thomlin crouched beside Sir Aldric behind a fallen log, a borrowed short sword heavy at his hip. "You should move further back," Sir Aldric whispered. "There's no shame in—" "Listen," Thomlin interrupted. In the pre-dawn stillness, distant hoofbeats rumbled like approaching thunder. Minutes later, the first mercenaries appeared, rough men in mismatched armor riding tough mountain horses. Their leader, a massive man with a shaved head and a battle axe strapped to his back, raised his hand to halt the column at the exact spot Thomlin had predicted. The trap was sprung. Hidden knights emerged with war cries that shattered the morning quiet. The first line of mercenaries plunged into the concealed trench, horses screaming as they stumbled. Arrows rained from the trees, finding gaps in armor. Chaos erupted. Thomlin pressed himself against the ground as men and horses collided around him. The metallic smell of blood mixed with disturbed earth. A riderless horse leapt over their position, nearly trampling them. "Stay down," Sir Aldric ordered, rising to engage a mercenary who had spotted their position. Thomlin watched, transfixed, as knight and mercenary exchanged blows, the formal training of Halverick against the brutal efficiency of a sellsword. Sir Aldric parried a vicious strike but stumbled on the uneven ground, his injured arm failing him at a crucial moment. The mercenary raised his mace for a killing blow. Without thinking, Thomlin surged forward. He had no training, no skill with the borrowed sword, but he had spent a lifetime lifting heavy sacks of grain. He barreled into the mercenary with his full weight, sending them both tumbling. They rolled in the dirt, the larger man cursing as he tried to bring his weapon to bear in close quarters. Thomlin felt a gauntleted fist connect with his jaw, tasting blood. The mercenary pinned him, reaching for a dagger at his belt. Thomlin's hand closed around a rock. With all his strength, he smashed it against the man's temple. Once, twice, until the mercenary slumped sideways. Gasping, Thomlin pushed the unconscious body off and scrambled to his feet. All around, the battle was turning in Halverick's favor. The ambush had worked. Mercenaries retreated in disarray, pursued by mounted knights. Sir Aldric approached, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "You saved my life." Again. Thomlin, still shaking, could only nod. As the sun crested the eastern hills, casting long shadows through the forest, Halverick's forces regrouped. Of the 200 mercenaries, nearly half lay dead or captured. The rest had fled into the hills. Lord Halverick himself rode to the battlefield, his armor gleaming in the morning light. His eyes widened at the sight of the trenches, now filled with fallen enemies. "The miller's plan worked perfectly," Sir Aldric reported. "And father, he fought, saved my life when my arm failed me." Lord Halverick dismounted, approaching Thomlin, who stood awkwardly among the knights, his borrowed tunic now torn and bloodied. "It seems Halverick owes you another debt," the lord said formally. "First my son's life, now our victory." Before Thomlin could respond, Lord Varick pushed forward. "My lord, we must pursue the remaining mercenaries before they regroup." "Indeed," Lord Halverick agreed. "Sir Aldric, take half our forces and—" A cry from one of the scouts interrupted him. "My lord, riders approaching from the east. They bear the royal standard." All heads turned. In the distance, a procession of mounted knights appeared, sunlight glinting off polished armor. At their center rode a figure whose gold-trimmed surcoat and circlet could only belong to one man. "The king," Lord Halverick breathed. "Here, now." Thomlin watched as the battlefield, already chaotic, erupted into frantic activity. Knights straightened their armor and servants rushed to prepare a proper greeting. Even Lord Varick seemed momentarily at a loss. In the confusion, Thomlin found himself forgotten. He stood amid the aftermath of battle, a simple miller covered in another man's blood, as the monarch of the realm approached. And strangely, all he could think was that he hadn't finished milling his wheat. The royal procession halted at the edge of the battlefield. 20 knights in gleaming armor formed a protective ring around their sovereign, sunlight dancing off polished breastplates and helm crests. Banners bearing the royal crest, a crowned falcon clutching a sword, fluttered in the morning breeze. King Edric of Westmere dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than on thrones. Unlike the ornate clothing Thomlin had imagined royalty would wear, the king's attire was practical, a leather gambeson beneath a surcoat of deep blue, embroidered with silver thread. Only his circlet of gold, set with 3 sapphires, marked him as monarch. Lord Halverick knelt immediately, the assembled knights following suit. Thomlin, uncertain of protocol, awkwardly bent his knee a moment later, eyes fixed on the blood-soaked ground. "Rise, old friend," the king said, his voice surprisingly warm as he approached Lord Halverick. "It seems we've arrived at an interesting moment." Lord Halverick stood, clasping the king's extended forearm in the warrior's greeting. "Your Majesty honors us with your presence. Had we known of your coming, then you would have hidden this from me?" The king gestured to the battlefield, where servants were still clearing bodies from the trench. "I prefer to see my realm as it is, not dressed up for royal royal visits. His keen eyes surveyed the scene, lingering on the clever positioning of the ambush. These mercenaries, the same band that has been troubling the northern holdings? We believe so, Your Majesty, Sir Aldric answered, stepping forward and bowing. They carried no banner, but their arms and tactics match reports from Westmarch and Dunfield. The king nodded thoughtfully. And yet here they lie defeated, when two of my best garrisons could not manage the same. His gaze swept the gathered men, settling finally on Thomlin, who still knelt awkwardly in his bloodied clothes. You're not one of Halverick's knights. Lord Halverick cleared his throat. Your Majesty, this is Thomlin of Eldharrow. A miller. A miller, the king repeated, raising an eyebrow. Stand. Thomlin of Eldharrow, tell me what a miller was doing in the midst of battle. Thomlin rose unsteadily, acutely aware of the stark contrast between himself and the assembled nobility. The borrowed sword hung awkwardly at his hip, and dried blood, both his and the mercenaries', crusted his hands. I showed them where to dig the trenches, Your Majesty, he said simply, unsure how to address a king. A local guide? The king asked, glancing at Lord Halverick. Much more than that, Sir Aldric interjected. This man saved my life in the forest 2 days past, tending wounds that would have been my death, and today, his knowledge of the land gave us victory against superior numbers. The king's interest visibly sharpened. Is that so? He studied Thomlin more carefully. Approach, miller. Heart pounding, Thomlin stepped forward. Up close, he could see that the king's face, though handsome, bore the weathered lines of campaigns and concern. He was younger than Thomlin had expected, perhaps 40 winters, but his eyes held the weight of a kingdom. They say common men can't look a king in the eye without flinching, King Edric remarked. Yet you do. Thomlin hadn't realized he was doing so. He immediately lowered his gaze. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect. None taken. I find it refreshing. The king circled Thomlin slowly. Tell me how a miller devised a battle strategy that confounded professional soldiers. It wasn't strategy, Your Majesty, Thomlin answered honestly. Just knowledge. The creek bed floods each spring, cutting deeper into the earth. I've walked these hills since childhood. Knowledge is strategy, the king corrected. The greatest generals win through understanding terrain as much as tactics. He gestured toward the battlefield. This victory may have saved more than Halverick. These mercenaries have plagued my northern borders for months. Lord Varick, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally stepped forward. Your Majesty, while the miller's local knowledge proved useful, surely the credit for victory belongs to Halverick's knights who did the actual fighting. The king's gaze cooled as it shifted to Varick. And yet my reports indicate these same mercenaries overwhelmed 3 companies of knights in open combat. He turned back to Thomlin. Sometimes wisdom comes from unexpected sources. A royal attendant approached, whispering something in the king's ear. King Edric nodded and addressed Lord Halverick. We have matters of state to discuss. The mercenary threat may be larger than we thought. As the nobility withdrew toward Halverick Castle, Thomlin found himself once again forgotten. He stood alone amid the aftermath of battle until a squire approached. The king commands your presence at the castle, miller, the young man said, offering a waterskin, to clean yourself before the council. The great hall of Halverick had been transformed. Where feast tables had stood the previous night, now a massive round council table dominated the space. Maps and documents covered its surface, illuminated by tall candelabras. Thomlin, hastily washed and dressed in fresh borrowed clothes, waited nervously outside the chamber until Sir Aldric appeared. Come, the knight said. They're asking for you. Inside, the council was already in heated discussion. King Edric sat at the head of the table, flanked by Lord Halverick and his master-at-arms. Other nobles and knights filled the remaining seats, while scribes recorded the proceedings. Paid by someone with considerable resources, a gray-haired man in a scholar's robe was saying. Mercenaries of this caliber don't come cheap. Durenstein has always coveted the river passage, suggested another lord. This could be their attempt to destabilize our control. Or it could be the mountain clans finally united under that new warlord, countered a weather-beaten knight. King Edric noticed Thomlin's arrival and gestured him forward. The miller who knows the land, join us. An uncomfortable silence fell as Thomlin approached the table. There was no empty chair. Clearly, his participation had not been planned. A servant hurriedly brought a stool, placing it awkwardly at the edge of the circle. Thomlin sat, feeling every noble eye upon him. We're discussing the mercenary threat, the king explained. Their patterns suggest they've been mapping our defenses, seeking weaknesses. Lord Varick snorted. What would a miller know of such matters? Perhaps more than you think, King Edric replied evenly. Thomlin, in your travels around these hills, have you noticed strangers? People asking questions or observing the castle? Thomlin considered carefully before answering. 3 months passed, Your Majesty. A merchant stopped at the mill. He asked about the castle patrols and how often supplies came through the valley. I thought nothing of it then. What did this merchant look like? Pressed Lord Halverick. Tall, with a scar across his jaw. He claimed to sell salt from the eastern provinces, but his accent was wrong. Too northern. The master-at-arms leaned forward. Like the accent of the mercenary commander we captured? A murmur ran through the assembly. There's more, Thomlin added. Hesitant, but committed now. For the past season, men I didn't recognize would camp by the North Ridge. They claimed to be hunters, but they carried no game, and their horses were war-trained. I avoided them. The king exchanged a significant look with Lord Halverick. It seems they've been scouting for months, gathering intelligence. But why target Halverick specifically? Asked Lady Elaine, who sat near her father. We're not a border fortress. The river, Thomlin said, then immediately regretted speaking out of turn. Go on, the king encouraged. Forgive me, your majesty, but Halverick controls the narrowest crossing of the White River. In spring, when the snows melt, it's the only safe passage for 20 miles. An army that controlled this crossing could move troops north or south unchallenged. Stunned silence followed his observation. By the gods, breathed the master-at-arms. He's right. We've always viewed the river as a trade route, not a military asset. This miller sees what my own strategists missed, King Edric said, his expression grim. If Halverick fell, the entire eastern flank of the kingdom would be vulnerable. The discussion continued, with lords arguing potential threats and defensive measures. To Thomlin's surprise, the king occasionally turned to him for his perspective on the local terrain or the patterns of the strangers he'd observed. As the council extended into the afternoon, Thomlin's initial nervousness faded. The nobles might understand warfare and politics, but he knew the land, every hill, valley, and hidden path. For the first time in his life, that knowledge was valued beyond its use for gathering herbs or finding game. When the council finally adjourned at dusk, King Edric approached Thomlin as the others filed out. You've given us much to consider, Miller, he said. Lord Halverick tells me you refused any reward for saving his son. Thomlin nodded. I need nothing, your majesty. All men need something, the king countered. Security, purpose, recognition. He studied Thomlin thoughtfully. What if I offered you a position? The crown could use someone with your observational skills and knowledge. The offer hung in the air between them. Unexpected, life-changing. Thomlin thought of his mill, of the simple rhythms that had defined his existence. He thought of the battle, of the man he had killed with a rock. He thought of the nobles who had sneered at him just yesterday, now listening to his words. Your Majesty, he began carefully, I am honored beyond words, but I am just a miller. The fields and streams are my world. King Edric smiled, not unkindly. Consider it. We'll speak again before I depart. He turned to leave, then paused. Tell me, Thomlin, if you return to your mill, will you be content knowing what else you might have become? With that question echoing in his mind, Thomlin watched the King of Westmere walk away, leaving him alone with a choice he had never imagined having to make. Dawn broke over Halverick Castle, painting ancient stone in hues of amber and gold. Thomlin stood on the same balcony where Sir Aldric had shown him the crack in the wall, watching as the king's procession prepared for departure in the bailey below. Squires fastened saddlebags while knights checked armor and weapons. The royal standard fluttered in the morning breeze. Have you decided? Sir Aldric asked, joining him at the stone railing. Thomlin sighed, his breath visible in the cool air. Is it a decision when there is no real choice? A miller cannot refuse his king. You misunderstand Edric, Sir Aldric replied. If you truly wish to return to your mill, he will respect that choice. His offer was genuine, not a command. Below, King Edric emerged from the keep, his royal circlet catching the sunlight. Lords and ladies bowed as he passed, but the king's eyes scanned the balconies, finally finding Thomlin. He awaits your answer, Sir Aldric said softly. For 3 days, Thomlin had wrestled with the king's offer. A position at court, advisor on matters of land and common folk, seemed like a dream beyond imagining for a simple miller. Yet every time he considered accepting, he felt the phantom weight of the borrowed sword at his hip, remembered the sound of the mercenary's skull cracking beneath his rock. I know what I must do, Thomlin said finally. In the great hall, King Edric sat in Lord Halverick's ornate chair, receiving final petitions before departure. Lords in fine velvet stood alongside merchants seeking royal favor. Thomlin waited at the back, conscious of his borrowed clothes, now properly fitted by the castle tailor, but still feeling foreign against his skin. When his turn came, Thomlin approached and knelt before the king. Rise, Thomlin of Eldharrow, King Edric commanded. Have you considered my offer? I have, your majesty, Thomlin replied, meeting the king's gaze directly, and I must decline. A murmur ran through the assembled nobles. Even the king seemed momentarily surprised. Explain, he said simply. Thomlin took a deep breath. Your majesty, I am honored beyond words by your offer, but my place is at my mill. among the people who depend on me." He gestured to the fine hall around them. "This world, of courts and councils, is not mine. I would lose myself in it. And if I told you that your knowledge could save lives, that your understanding of the common folk could help me be a better king to all my subjects, then I would say, Your Majesty, that you can have my counsel without taking me from my home." Thomlin's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Let me be your eyes among the ordinary people. Let me remain a miller who can tell you what the land and its people truly need." King Edric leaned forward, interested. "You propose to serve the crown while remaining at your mill?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I can observe, listen, and report what the common folk would never tell a noble. I can watch the borders and roads for unusual activity, as I've always done." The king considered this, fingers tapping thoughtfully on the chair's wooden arm. "A commoner's spy. Unprecedented." Lord Varick stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this is absurd. We cannot entrust matters of state security to a man who has already proven his worth twice over." King Edric interrupted. "I disagree, Lord Varick. Sometimes the most valuable perspective is from below, not above." The king rose, descending the 3 steps to stand directly before Thomlin. "Very well, Thomlin of Eldharrow, I accept your counteroffer." He drew a ring from his finger, a simple band of silver, not his royal signet. "Take this. Show it to any of my messengers, and they will carry your words directly to me." Thomlin accepted the ring with trembling hands. "I will serve faithfully, Your Majesty. I know you will." The king turned to Lord Halverick. "See that his mill is protected. No one is to interfere with him." "As you command, Your Majesty," Lord Halverick replied with a bow. As the audience concluded, Thomlin stepped outside into the castle courtyard, the king's ring heavy in his palm. Lady Elaine approached, her silk dress rustling softly. "You're leaving, then?" she asked. "Yes, my lady. The mill won't run itself." She smiled. "A shame. You've brought something refreshing to Halverick." She hesitated, then added, "I ride near Eldharrow sometimes. Perhaps I might stop for flour one day." Before Thomlin could respond, a royal guard approached. "His Majesty requests your presence before departure, Miller." Thomlin found the king mounting his warhorse, surrounded by his knights. "Your Majesty," King Edric leaned down from his saddle. "One final matter, Thomlin. What reward would you ask for your service to Halverick? Name anything within reason." Thomlin thought of his neighbors in Eldharrow, the widow Marta with 5 hungry children, old Willem whose hands were too gnarled to work his land, young Eliza who dreamed of learning letters but had no means for education. "The north field below the castle lies fallow," Thomlin said. "Grant it to the people of Eldharrow for common use, and perhaps a teacher for the village children once each week." The king's eyebrows rose. "You ask nothing for yourself?" "I ask for what will make my home stronger, Your Majesty." King Edric straightened in his saddle, a new respect in his eyes. "It shall be done." He turned to Lord Halverick. "See to it immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty." With a final nod to Thomlin, the king spurred his horse forward. The royal procession followed, hooves thundering across the drawbridge as they departed. Thomlin watched until the last banner disappeared around the forest bend, then turned to Sir Aldric. "I should return home as well." "I'll escort you," the knight offered. "No need. I've walked these paths all my life." Sir Aldric clasped his forearm in the warrior's greeting. "Until we meet again." Thomlin of Eldharrow. The journey back to his mill seemed shorter than before. As Thomlin crested the final hill, the familiar sight of his weathered mill with its creaking water wheel filled him with unexpected emotion. Smoke rose from the chimney. Neighbors had kept the fire burning in his absence. As he approached, a figure emerged from the doorway. Marta, the widow, carrying a basket of fresh bread. "Thomlin," she called, surprise and relief in her voice. "We feared you'd been pressed into service at the castle." "No," he replied with a smile. "Just visiting." Before he could reach his door, another villager spotted him, then another. Soon a small crowd gathered, peppering him with questions about the castle, the king, the battle they'd heard rumors about. Thomlin answered patiently, omitting the details of his arrangement with the king. When they finally dispersed, he entered his humble home, breathing in the familiar scent of hearthfire and dried herbs. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, his wooden spoon hanging by the fireplace, his grandmother's mortar and pestle on the shelf, his straw mattress in the corner. Yet something had changed, not the mill, but Thomlin himself. He placed the king's silver ring in a small wooden box beneath a loose floorboard, then changed back into his old, comfortable clothes. The borrowed finery he folded carefully, setting it aside for return to the castle. As evening fell, Thomlin lit his lantern and walked to the mill house. The familiar creak of the water wheel welcomed him home. Grain needed grinding. Life continued. He ran his hands over the millstones, feeling their rough texture, the honest wear of years of service. He had chosen this life again, but with new purpose. His eyes would watch the roads for strangers with northern accents. His ears would listen for the concerns of common folk that never reached noble ears. His hands would still grind the wheat that fed his neighbors. The next morning, Thomlin woke before dawn, as was his habit. He kindled the fire and stepped outside to draw water from the well. He stopped, surprised. A line of people stood waiting, not villagers with grain to be milled, but finely dressed lords and ladies from Halverick Castle. At their head stood Lord Halverick himself, dismounting from his horse. "Thomlin of Eldharrow," he said formally, "we have come to seek your counsel." "My counsel, my lord? The king speaks highly of your wisdom. Word has spread." Lord Halverick gestured to those behind him. "We face challenges within our own lands that perhaps we have been blind to." Thomlin looked past him at the line of nobles, men and women who days ago would not have acknowledged his existence, now standing patiently outside his humble door. Among them, he spotted Lady Elaine, who offered a small smile. "I am just a miller, my lord," Thomlin said. "No," Lord Halverick replied. "You are much more. The king saw it. Now we see it too." Thomlin stood silent for a moment, considering the strange turn his life had taken. Then he smiled and gestured to his door. "Then enter and be welcome. My fire is small, but it warms all who sit beside it equally." One by one, the nobles of Halverick entered the humble hut of Thomlin the miller, a man who had refused a king's offer, yet somehow found himself serving the kingdom in a way no one could have foreseen. And as he stoked the fire to boil water for his unexpected guests, Thomlin realized that sometimes the most powerful position was not on a throne or at a council table, but exactly where you were meant to be. For the real measure of a person is not the title they hold or the castle they inhabit, but the impact they have on the lives around them. In the eyes of a king or a commoner, honor and wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places, even in the simple hands of a miller who knew the true value of people beyond their stations. In the days that followed, nobles continued to seek Thomlin's counsel, captains asked for his knowledge of the terrain, and ordinary villagers brought their disputes for his fair judgment. From his humble mill, a new kind of influence spread throughout the realm, not of power or wealth but of honest wisdom that bridged the divide between high and low. And when traveling bards later sang of the miller of Eldharrow, they told not of a common man who rose above his station, but of a kingdom that learned to see the nobility in every soul, regardless of birth or title. For true worth, as Thomlin had shown, lies not in the crown upon your head, but in the strength of your character and the wisdom of your heart. Between castle walls and thatched roofs, between silken banners and simple cloth, lies a truth as old as the land itself, that honor is earned through deeds, not granted by birth. If this tale has touched your heart, remember that in every encounter lies the potential for transformation, for both the highest lord and the humblest servant. In our stories, we celebrate those moments when the world changes because someone looked beyond appearance to see true worth. Until our paths cross again, may you recognize the value in those the world too easily overlooks.